Alrighty. Let's go live. Hope that you are doing well. God bless you. Hope that you are doing well. We're going to talk a little bit about Fannie Lou Hamer today. So I hope that you are doing well. Want to kind of jump into this and just talk a little bit about Fannie Lou Hamer and just talk a little bit about kind of what she means to us and some of the things that we talk about when we think about just Black history and some of the people who were strong leaders and strong women who we can see throughout history who represent some of the ideals that we talk about when it comes to a Kemetic theology or Kushite theology. When we look at history and we look at Kemetic history and Kushite history, we see strong, idealistic leadership in women, throughout eons, as far back as we go. And I think it's time that we celebrate it. It's up to us to kind of lift up our culture, lift up all the people in our culture, and really understand that there's a dynamic where we see men and women as representing God, and we see men and women as celebrating those aspects of God that make us great. They give us characteristics that allow us to achieve something in life that's bigger than just a little bit. And she is certainly one of those people. So I want to kind of talk about her today and kind of celebrate in that. And first of all, I want to thank you, those who are supporting. I want to remind you that I have more than 10 books on Amazon. If you get a chance to check it out, books by Danita Smith. Religion of the Black Land is one of them. I have 10 things your child should know about reading, writing, and math. I also have stories about Black history, volume 1, 2, and 3. I also have the Adventures of Tahari Amen. So there are several books there. If you want to learn about Black history or various things about education that are there on Amazon, I ask you to check out. And thank you for those of you who've done it. And leave a review if you can, if you're on Amazon. But I very much appreciate your support. And those who are members here on YouTube, I very much appreciate it. So let's start talking about Fannie Lou Hamer, right? And as we start to talk about her, I want to talk about her in the context of Kemetic ideals and what she's known for. And many of you may know that, but we'll go over some of the major points of her life. But we also want to talk about some of the concepts that she represents, because as you stop and think about just Fannie Lou Hamer in general, and I want to kind of pull up this timeline that you guys have probably seen me kind of use before as I kind of pull myself out of it. And talk about it a little bit. You see this timeline, it kind of goes back. And I look at, you may have seen this before if you've seen some of my earlier videos. I look at, just time going back, really millions of years. You can go back millions of years to see human ancestral activity in Africa, right? To see us, we come from Africa, human beings are a product of Africa. And as I think about it, you see strong women in place in Africa in many ways, and deified and respected in deities, respected in the divinity that they are. You see that reflected in many ways in African language, in African thought, and in African theology. And as I look at this particular woman who's mentioned here, and I have her also in my Before Egypt video that I have that you can see on my website, this link there. But this woman, as you see on the left, is someone who is from thousands of years ago, before Egypt, before Kemet was Kemet. We're talking pre-dynastic era, and we're talking about a situation, a time when, we're going well back before anybody's talking about the unification of the two lands and any of that type of thing. You see women depicted in marvelous ways, in remarkable ways, in strong ways, showing the respect they have for women, showing women in ancestral or in ceremonial poses, showing the deity likeness of women and the manifestation of God and their connection with service and their connection with worship. It would take years, many, many years, even thousands of years, before we've gotten to the point where women can represent religion or spirituality in some segments at the highest level. But that's not what it was like back in the day. That's not what it was like when it comes to our ancestors. So as we start to think about this, as we go way back into history, and we start to think about how women were represented in some of the things that we manifest, we understand that strength has been there, it always been there. And Fannie Lou Hamer embodies that. When I think about leadership and I think about strength, we've talked a lot about the Ausarian Tale here, and we're going to touch on that as it relates to Fannie Lou Hamer now. But the whole idea of Haru, and a Haru representing that courage, when you put divine discipline and dedication, which is our set, and you combine that with your divinity, your ability to see God in yourself and as yourself, you begin to develop the courage and the will and the ability to choose the right thing to do. And this is certainly what she did with her life. She had courage, she faced things, and she was able to develop a remarkable strength in the face of adversity. And that's Haru. That's giving birth to courage in your life. That's giving birth to things in your life that are remarkable. So I'm going to talk about this resource, and I'll be having many more resources coming out, for Black History Month and in general with respect to Black history, that you can see resources and courses and things of that nature that you can look at and kind of delve into your own, because I want to get deep into this and kind of share this information. But as I talk about this, and we kind of walk through this resource and talk about this, we're really, kind of jumping on and really communicating some things with respect to, how we're looking at this in general. So as we think about Fannie Lou Hamer, she is somebody who, as you probably know, was born in Mississippi, right? And what she had to manifest in her life was no small task. She had to actually look, and if you look at the Ausarian Tale, and you probably have seen the Tree of Life or studied some around that from our men's things, you look at the different aspects of your spirit, and you see yourself having to develop discipline. You see yourself having to develop courage and will, as we talked about. You see yourself having to use your imagination in a divine way to help strengthen you and move you towards things that you need to do. You see yourself having to live according to ma'at and truth and justice, and doing unto others as you would have them do unto you. You see yourself kind of living according to God's will. These are different aspects of your spirit that you have to develop. And I say I think in many ways, Fannie Lou Hamer developed these aspects of her spirit. She developed things about herself that allowed her to do things that were just remarkable, to really help other people and to be a blessing in other people's lives. So she was born in 1917. In October of 1917, and her father's name was Jim, and her mother's name was Luella, and she was the 20th child. They had like 20 children, and she was the 20th child of them. So obviously, this is decades, if you will, decades after slavery. Obviously, sharecropping is taking place. Obviously, in 1917 is just 2 years before the Red Summer. So we're at the height of lynching and Jim Crow, and all kinds of craziness is going on. And I don't know if you have sharecroppers in your family. I know that I have sharecroppers, and that history of sharecropping in my family. God bless you. Peace, Epi. God bless you. Peace and love. Thank you so much for joining. I appreciate you. Thank you so much, William. Thank you much, Epi. I very much appreciate it. I have sharecropping in my family, and it was interesting. It's crazy to go back as a child and to see people, in the South, and to talk to people and have my family talk to people, and family members who would say, older family members long time ago saying that, our family used to sharecrop right over there. And that house over there was the house that we were basically sharecropping out of. And that was, basically paying, or so that we owed money to. This was a real thing. And a lot of people, and a lot of Black people had that impact their lives and impact them for generations, the whole idea of sharecropping. So like I said, it's in my family. I've seen it, I've heard about it, I've talked about it, and it's something that was impacting Fannie Lou Hamer and her family as they were sharecroppers in Mississippi. I mean, the deal with sharecropping. She was 6 years old. She told the story, because I've listened to a number of her speeches and a lot of things about her that kind of tell her story, and a lot of things she said about her story herself. And she said she was 6 years old in Mississippi, like playing by the side of the road. And the person who owned the area, the crops that her family was sharecropping on, basically came up to her. Grown man came up to her while she was 6 and said, can you pick cotton? You think you can pick? And she was like, yeah, I guess so. I don't know. She's 6 years old. He said, yeah, I think you can go in there and start picking. He sent her at 6. A 6-year-old child, a 6-year-old girl, to go sharecrop in the field in Mississippi, right? And by the time she was 13, she was picking 200 or 300 pounds a day, I believe, of cotton. By the time she was 13. And so here this woman is, her family, being taken advantage of, living in poverty. One of the things she said is that, when you've had to be hungry and had to stay hungry and could do nothing about your hunger, when you get to the point where you see other people suffering, you want to do something to help them. You just can't help but help them. She is the person who's living, like very many people, in poverty, living out the whole Poor People's Campaign that Martin Luther King was trying to fight against, and that so many people were talking about in the 1960s. She's living that, right? And in her sharecropping, days, if you will, she's there, and she is, being exploited, just like other people are being exploited, where you can never make money. You always own the person who owns the crops, because not only are you, quote unquote, paying for rent out of the crops that you pick, but you're also paying for supplies, right? They're just cheating you. Many of the people were not allowed to go to school because they were working. Like she had to work at 6 years old, being forced to work. So you're not getting an education. So they did all these things. And you combine that, because I was reading some things with respect to Atlanta and Georgia and Martin Luther King's grandfather, and the whole literacy test that they put in place in Georgia, in various places, in Mississippi, in various places. So that's how you could vote. Keeping people tied to the land in debt, treat them just like they were in slavery, not allowing them to go to school, forcing them not to go to school. And then when it came time to vote, since they couldn't change the Constitution in 1917, they give you these ridiculous literacy tests that they themselves couldn't pass, right? You know, being able to interpret something in Latin or interpret a part of the Constitution as read to you in a way that satisfies the registrar, who could just say yes or no, you don't know what you're talking about. These types of things are what they subjected Black people to. And you find then when she was just 20 years old, she got married to a man named Perry Hamer. So that's how she got the last name of Hamer. And, you know, they tried to have children. And, you know, it was an amazing, incredible, ridiculous thing. She went into the hospital for what should have been a pretty straightforward operation. And they ended up giving her a hysterectomy. You know, an entire hysterectomy where she did not know they were giving her a hysterectomy. She did not go in for an operation. She did not sign any type of consent form. They gave her hysterectomy. And this is something they did so often to Black women in Mississippi that they had a term for it. They called it the Mississippi appendectomy. That's what they called it. And so when they did that, they were basically trying to control Black population. Here are women, you know, our precious bodies, going into to the hospital, going into for something routine, and they take out all of your reproductive organs with no consent, nothing of that, and nothing you could do about it. You think about the woman's bodies. We were talking about, you know, the sacredness of the woman and being able to look at her as a divine vessel and the divinity that's manifested in her. And think about how many people have disrespected that. How many women, in particular Black women, have had to go through amazing, horrible things that doesn't even speak to who they are, and yet still come through it. Yet in some kind of way still learn how to love, yet in some kind of way come out and still help other people, yet manage to lift up entire communities, which is what Fannie Lou Hamer did, and entire nations at some point in time through their strength, even though they were treated in these horrible ways in hospitals and in various situations. So she had a hysterectomy without her knowledge, without her consent, and that was horrible. So they took away her ability to reproduce, right? And so you find that this sets her off. I mean, she becomes upset, obviously, as you imagine any person would be, any woman would be, and it gets her to start to fighting and to start to fight back for all the injustices that they were experiencing. You think about her sharecropping at 6 years old, her family being put in all types of poverty situations, them never being able to get out of debt or to be upwardly mobile, and then, you know, not being able to vote and have people represent them to help make things better. So she starts to go down and she starts to, on August 31st in 1962, she starts to go down and begin to register people to vote. She starts to get involved and she starts to help people register to vote. And this begins some of the attacks and some of the horrible things that would happen to her, because as she initially goes down to vote, they start to try to teach them a lesson. They start to, you know, to give them literacy tests, and they start to arrest the bus drivers that were driving with them and give them and charge them with fines and trying to intimidate them. And when she started to do that in the early 1960s, she comes back, and at this time she had gotten to the point where she and her husband had adopted some children. They adopted some daughters. They adopted some children. And when she gets back from registering to vote and helping to register other people to vote, you know, the children are telling her that the person who owns the crop, the sharecropper, is mad at her. And her husband told her the same thing. And she gets her employer, this guy who's taking advantage of her, basically comes to her and says, you know what? You went down there to register to vote. Everybody knows it. God bless you. I know that's horrible what they did. You need to stop. You need to take back your registration. And you know what? Even if you did go take back your registration, I'm not sure if that's going to make me happy, because I'm not sure if we're ready for that here in Mississippi. He was threatening her. He was telling her anything could happen to her, whether it was violence or her losing her source of income. And she was already, you know, in poverty, and that, you know, he was threatening her. Here's her employer telling her not to vote. Think about how much women have gone through. Think about how you have to face these challenges in your life, and you still have to overcome them. You know, we can't always choose our challenges. And we don't always get to choose our sacrifices. We do get to choose how we respond to them. Because I know a lot of times we will judge something that is successful by material things. So this person was successful because they had a lot of money. There are a lot of people with a lot of money nowadays who are not helping people. The way they should. There are a lot of people who did a lot less than her and have a lot more resources, had a lot more resources than she had. We can't always judge people by their money. And the things that you're dealt with in life, you know, it's hard to say. You can't deal with the hand sometimes that you're given. The hand is dealt to you. What you deal with is how you respond to that sacrifice, how you respond to that challenge. And her response was remarkable. She told that man, she looked him right in the face. She said, I didn't go down there to register for you. I went down there to register for me. And basically, I'm not taking back my registration. And as soon as she said that she had to go, she couldn't stay at her house anymore because they were going to try to kill her. And the place where they thought she was staying got shot up by bullets. And other places around the other people were getting shot and getting killed. Places where they thought she was, they were shooting at her. And other people, like as I mentioned, were getting shot and killed. But that didn't stop her. Stop for a second and imagine you're living in the 1960s in Ruleville, Mississippi, and you're trying to teach people and help people register to vote, and people are shooting at you, trying to kill you. The one place where you can go get money to try to give yourself something to eat is now telling you you don't have a job and you're basically out on your own and you're in poverty. Would you do it? What made her continue to do it? What made her face? If you think about the Ausarian Tale, and the fight that has to take place between Heru and Set, and Heru having to grow up to the point where he could get strong enough, have his will enough, have his mother help him enough, have Tahuti help him enough, God's plan, where he could stand up to Set and fight for his rightful place in society and his rightful place in the land. She had to have courage. That was a decision she had to make. And we talk about Heru from a courageous standpoint. She had to develop this aspect of her spirit to say, despite the fact that you're trying to kill me, despite the fact that there are bullets flying through places where I'm staying, I'm going to do this anyway. And that's a remarkable thing for a person to do, knowing they have no out, knowing that they have nowhere to go. She did remarkable things to respect it, but she didn't stop. So obviously she didn't stop. And it's interesting to me as I look at this and kind of point out this timeline, if you just kind of look at things, and I'm just kind of putting it into some perspective. If you see here, just to give you an idea, so 1914, Marcus Garvey is forming the UNIA. So this is just before Booker T. Washington dies. And when he gets here, Booker T. Washington, passes away in 1915. And I'm just picking out some dates here. You have 1954, the Brown versus the Board of Education and the desegregation, the order to desegregate, schools, public school system. You have Emmett Till killed in 1955. You had the Montgomery bus boycott in 1955 and Rosa Parks refusing to get out of her seat in Montgomery. All these things are happening. There are many, many more things happening with sit-ins and many, many more things happening. And you get to 1963. 1963 is when Fannie Lou Hamer becomes jailed, which we're going to talk about in just a second. Many things happen there. The JFK is there are many things that happen with him. In the same month, at the same time when Fannie Lou Hamer is jailed, which we're just about to talk about, she receives a horrible beating. Medgar Evers is killed. He's killed right there in Mississippi as well. He's killed while she's in jail. Things are happening. And obviously the March on Washington would take place later on that year, as well as the bombing in Birmingham, the bombing and the killing of the 4 little girls. A lot happened in 1963. And so as we start to think about this and all of these things are happening around the country. But despite that, Fannie Lou Hamer is still standing strong. She doesn't have the backing necessarily of an organization like Martin Luther King had, and he got killed. He was assassinated. She doesn't have the backing. She's not in a major city like Atlanta or DC or Boston. She's in Ruleville, Mississippi. And there's not much protection for her, but this woman is standing strong anyway. She is standing strong anyway. So she goes on and continues to go to voter registration drives, and she visits some place in South Carolina. And on their way back, as they get into Mississippi, in Montgomery County, Mississippi, they stop at a restaurant where people have to use a restroom, and they get off the bus and they go. And of course, the restaurant kicks them out. And she happens to still be on the bus. And when she sees the people who were on the bus getting kicked out of the restaurant, she gets off the bus to help and see what's going on. And police roll up. And when they roll up, they arrest everybody. And they see her and they say, get that one over there too. And as they get her, they start to treat her roughly. They kick her. They start kicking her as they put her into the police car. She goes down to the precinct, and she's there. And there's another woman named Sylvester Simpson who's with her. Another woman, all trying to register to vote. And they take Miss Simpson first, and they go put her in a cell. And Fannie Lou Hamer talks about being able to hear Miss Simpson. She could hear her talking and hear her screaming through the door. And she could hear somebody saying to her, do you know how to say yes, sir? Calling her the N-word, calling Miss Simpson the N-word. And do you know how to say yes, sir? And she says, yes, I know how to say it. He said, then call me sir. She said, I don't know you well enough. And then Miss Simpson would commence to scream, and you could hear her being smacked and being hit and being beaten. Fannie Lou, you could hear it, and it was heart-wrenching. And then it was her turn. She was next. They took Fannie Lou Hamer and they took her into a cell, and they brought 2 black men, 2 African-American men, and who were prisoners in the cell, in the prison. And they told her, they gave them They gave them sticks. They gave them something to beat her with. There were 2 Caucasian men in the room as well. And they told the black men, the African-American men, to beat her. And they put her on the bottom bed of a bunk bed. And one of the men began to hit her. He begins to just hit her as hard as he can with the baton he had on. He begins to hit her. And Fannie Lou Hamer had polio when she was a child. So she's trying to protect the left side of her body where she had problems, with polio, which is a lot of challenges with polio, even walking. But the man is beating the heck out of her. She's screaming. He's beating her. And she said he beat her so hard and he beat her so long until he was exhausted. And then they told the other African-American prisoner to pick up the baton, and he commenced to beat her as well. And she had on a dress, as many women wore dresses like all the time, and her dress began to rise up, and she's trying to work her dress down. Here she is in a bunk bed with all these men in the room, and she's trying to work her dress down, but they continue to beat her as her dress rises up. And one of the Caucasian men in the room comes over to her and hits her on the head and tells her, shut up and to stop screaming so loud. She incurred so many injuries, so many internal injuries, so many bruises, so many problems from the beating that those men gave her. And she stayed there for days. She was not able to get help. None of the members of the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee or her husband were able to get to her in order to get her medical attention. It was days before she got medical attention. And you start to think, here is this woman in a jail cell with 2 men beating her, and other officers and officials are there watching her and beating her, and she's just screaming for her life, just like the woman who was right next door also being beat. And this woman didn't stop. She fought anyway. And then she got up and she went eventually to the 1964 Democratic National Convention, and she told her story on television. And it riveted the world. You can Google it today. Google it and look at it. You can see documentaries on her presentation and what she said. And she talked about coming from Mississippi and coming to the Democratic National Convention and saying, basically the Democratic Party and the party that was coming from Mississippi was all white. And they excluded black people from the primary, so she helped to organize their own political entities so that they can come and be seated from Mississippi, because they weren't even allowed to be a part of the process to even become delegates. They were excluded with white only. And she told a story of being beaten and how she had to sleep with her phone off the hook because people are calling her day and night threatening to kill her. And she says, "Is this America?" And as this is being talked, and as she's telling her story on national television, it's riveting. She's raw. She's real. She's not holding back. She's telling all of America all the hateful things that happen that people don't want to talk about, that they didn't want to say out loud. She's telling them right in their face. And the story goes, Lyndon B. Johnson is seeing this happening, and he is obviously going to be the nominee. He starts to say, wait a minute. We're going to have a problem with this. He starts to say, wait a minute, let's try to change this. And he calls a impromptu press conference. And it's some type of announcement that he makes about somebody he's going to appoint to something that the press already knew or was not that important. And it was considered that he was doing this. He was probably doing this because he didn't want this woman, Fannie Lou Hamer, basically taking over the Democratic National Convention and telling the story and changing the narrative of the convention and have you talk about just what's happening in terms of voting and what's happening in terms of human rights in Mississippi. So Lyndon B. Johnson does that. And a lot of people say things, nice things about Lyndon B. Johnson, but when you dig deeper, there are a lot of nice things that you can't say about Lyndon B. Johnson. So there are things that are there that you may not think are so nice. And so she's saying this, and she's going to the Democratic National Convention. She's putting that out there. God bless you. She's amazing in the face of evil, right? And she's powerful, right? And so she's telling the entire nation this on national TV, and they're broadcasting this into everybody. And she becomes instantly a national name. She becomes a household name. People begin to see her. People begin to want to hear from her. Now her story is out. And even though Lyndon B. Johnson tried to call this impromptu press conference to get the press and the newscast to cut away from the Democratic National Convention to cover his newscast and his press conference, it almost had the opposite effect. Many of the reporters said that it just drummed up more conversation. Like, why would he do that? And it made people want to know more about what she said. So what he thought was going to be evil. Sometimes when you're fighting something, the thing that the people who don't want you to speak, who don't want the truth to come out, the very thing that they do to try to shut you up, it actually amplifies your voice, right? It actually amplifies your voice. And so she ends up becoming in demand as an orator, as a speaker. People begin to hear about her, but she doesn't stop there. She goes back to Ruralville, Mississippi, and she's in poverty, and people are in poverty. She helps to start the Freedom Farm Cooperative. She helps to start a cooperative. She gets donations by going around and speaking to people and having people donate. And she buys some, I think it's some like 600 acres and acres of land. I think it's like 600 acres of land there in Mississippi. And the woman brilliantly starts a co-op. She begins to go on the place, and part of the land is dedicated to housing. They begin to develop housing because people are poor. They don't have housing. They don't have food. As I mentioned, she said that when you're hungry, you've been hungry, and you've had to stay hungry, you see somebody else suffering, no matter who they are, black, white, but it doesn't matter, brown, whatever, you want to help that person. So she opened this co-op to everybody. Obviously, it was affecting a lot of African Americans, but she opened it up to everybody. And there were places on the co-op in the land, the hundreds of acres of land that they had, where they built homes for families. And so people could stay, and they had very modest rent and very modest things they had to do. They took part of the land and they grew vegetables. And they would allow people to come, families to come and pick the vegetables, like pick their greens, so they can take it home and freeze it and at least have something, at least have some vegetables to eat if they had nothing else to eat, because sometimes they had nothing to eat. She started a pig bank in this cooperative, and there were pigs on this acre in this cooperative, and what they would allow you to do if you were a family, you could come get a male pig and a female pig, take them back home, and once they made it and had children, had babies, you kept the babies and you bring the pigs back so that other people can use it. That's just brilliant, so that you can have food. A source of maybe income for yourself, so that the family would not be able to go hungry and not be able to eat. This woman was brilliant. She was doing everything's right, and everything she did obviously didn't last forever. There were a lot of challenges in what she was doing, but she was doing things that actually help people around. Think about that today. A cooperative where people can grow their own food and at least have vegetables that they can put in the store in their own house so they can have something to eat. Being able to share animals, because a lot of people are doing farming, so you can have the babies and the offspring and give the parents back. Having places where people can have homes and some decent place to live, at least for a period of time, or in order to help them get out of poverty and get out of homelessness. This is what she was doing on the ground. She started this cooperative in 1969, and it lasted until 1976, and she died a year later in 1977. So there were a lot of challenges with the cooperative, but the fact that she even did it and helped anybody, right? Imagine if you give somebody food and they can eat for a period of time. Imagine, and she talked about, she just didn't want people giving people for welfare. She just didn't want things to be given. She wanted the tools to bring people out of poverty. She wanted to utilize those tools, and that's what the cooperative was all about. So God bless her for that. Imagine being able to help anybody. What if you're in education and you teach a kid how to read, or you help a kid move farther in education? You just changed somebody's world. Imagine all the people that she helped, that she used her voice. Now that she was popular and people knew her all around the country, and maybe even all around the world in some instances, she started to use her voice to raise money for the co-op. She just didn't go out and just said, I'm going to enrich myself. She used her voice to help start something in her community for everybody who was poor. And when you go back and you listen to interviews of the people, like her daughters that she adopted, they talked about, they were like, her mom used to give something to everybody. She said, people used to come over the house, and dad would say, you give away so much, you're not even going to have clothes or even underwear on your back to give away, because you give away everything, right? She said that the daughter said that the people would come over, and if they needed rent money, or if they needed some food and they were hungry, or they had to pay their utilities, or whatever it might be, if Fannie Lou Hamer had it, she gave it. Now, it turns out that her husband, I believe, was a pig farmer, and his brother was a cow farmer. So they often had like pork and beef in their refrigerator, in their freezer, so that they at least had some food. And often when people would come from the neighborhood, she would give it to him, and she would talk. There's a very famous interview, one of the later interviews that she did, and she talked about, that now at that point in Mississippi, it wasn't just, 200 people coming to you and taking you and lynching you like they would do in the not so recent past. She said now they're starving you to death. You can't get jobs, and the killing is taking place in a different kind of way. She said they're still bombing churches, and they're still doing things, but the people are dying a slow death. They're dying from hunger and inability to have economic freedom or economic mobility. They can't feed themselves. must less yet educate themselves. So I want to remember, because this woman was talking about very real things on the ground: hunger, education, poverty, the ability to vote. And she was doing something about it. I think about her within the context of Heru. I think about her in the context of the Ausarian Tale. How do you develop the courage enough to stand up and to face whatever your challenges are in life, and to overcome them, and to face them, and to make an impact on people's lives? So I just want to remember Fannie Lou Hamer today. I thank you for joining me. I'm going to come back with more. Please leave your comments down below, and I thank you very much. God bless you.